Hey, Kelsey. Meredith, you're on mute.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll start over. Welcome on behalf of CRRA and the Edible Food Recovery Technical Council. We are hosting our second webinar today, all about the food industry and edible food generators. I do want to get started with a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to Mike to further introduce the webinar. We are going to be recording this, so I do ask that you keep your videos off while you're not speaking, and then presenters can turn their videos on when they are. If anyone needs any tech support, if you're having trouble in any way, please feel free to reach out to me. I introduced myself in the chat box. We'll be having lots of moderated conversation happening. So I'm just kind of on the tech side of things. So if you need any help, just feel free to let me know. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to start our webinar off.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank California Resource Recovery Association for giving us this platform, the ability to really connect the food industry to this edible food recovery effort. I want to thank all of our participants, our panelists, those of you who have joined us, and also those of you who will be watching this on YouTube afterwards. Also, I want to thank our Edible Food Recovery Technical Council Executive Committee, Lisa Coelho, Mauricio Cordova, Rachel Otero-Paris, and Meredith Knowles for helping put this together, our subcommittees for assisting us with content. So as we've talked about previously, we kind of laid out what, all the factors of a complicated process, which is edible food recovery. And the first priority we identified was the need to really engage and speak the food industry language. We want food, but we really technically don't speak their language. So this is an opportunity to bring in food industry people, leaders that represent a variety of different, that are from a variety of different areas, and allow them to give their perspective of how what food recovery looks like to them. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Just their perspective. So without any further ado, I want to start being able to introduce our participants today. We're going to kind of go in order, and we're going to let them introduce themselves, but I'm going to set it up by explaining to you what role they serve. So we're going to start with Kelsey Mager, who's a PhD postdoctoral researcher from UC Davis Department of Food Science and Technology. I just got a chance to read Kelsey's study last night, and it's phenomenal. So if without any further ado, Kelsey, if you can please introduce yourself.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. So my name's Kelsey. Like Mike said, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at UC Davis in the Department of Food Science and Technology, which means I think I'm the only panelist who's not actually a member of industry. But part of my recent work has involved interviewing people in industry, particularly growers. So we just completed a large-scale study of produce growers and recovery organizations in California, looking at the barriers and opportunities for agricultural food recovery. And so I'm looking forward to sharing some of what we learned in our discussion today.
Great, thank you very much. Next, we want to go to, since we're starting with produce, we're going to start with the actual food supply chain. So we'll start with the seed in the ground. And we want to go over to Steve Brazil, who's the CEO and founder of Sunterra Produce. And Steve, before I ask you to introduce yourself, I have to say that Steve and Sunterra has been one of the largest USDA emergency food providers during COVID. And the product has been phenomenal. So I had to throw that out there. Steve, if you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it, and it's great to be here. As Mike mentioned, Sunterra Produce is a company based in Orange County. We aggregate farm product and sell to retailers and wholesalers and processors throughout the U.S. And as Mike mentioned, when the pandemic hit, we were fortunate enough to be awarded a contract by the USDA. And what we did was we created fruit and vegetable boxes, farm boxes, and provided them to food banks and other 501c3s on behalf of the USDA. And it was an awesome program that highlighted, how we can get food that was going to be wasted at field level and into the families into the homes of families that need them. And this program was integral in creating that. And in addition to that, we've learned, through that program how to more effectively source products that are unwanted at field level, but are still meet all the criteria for healthy, delicious, and safe food, and finding a pathway for that food into food banks. And so separately and independently, we've been selling food boxes to food banks that are interested and have the available funding for it. So this is a brand new, exciting vertical for us. I've been involved in the growing and distributing of fresh fruits and vegetables for my entire life. So this is an exciting new avenue for farmers to realize additional revenue streams through product that would normally be utilized, while also answering all of the other, awesome questions that we're working on here today. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So we'll kind of stick with the food supply chain in that order. Next, I want to introduce to you a USDA inspected processor and distributor, Joe Bonafede, who's the principal of Field Source Foods in Brea, California. Joe, if you can jump on there and tell us about yourself and your connection with food recovery.
Joe, you're on mute.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. As Mike said, my name is Joe Bonafede. I'm a founder of Field Source Food Systems. We are a center-of-the-plate processor and distributor to the local market here in California. However, we produce and have product that go into retail applications nationwide. We are under USDA inspection, and which means that we have a federal inspector in our plant every day for various timelines. It could be a few minutes, it could be throughout the entire day. That being said, because of our industry, we really have a strong connection to perishable products, obviously, as not many of our products are frozen, but a tremendous amount of our products are fresh and have shelf lives. So we're always in the process through our logistics system of making sure that we're moving products in and out and to the right use. That being said, we often get many products that come to us through the packers, the plants, farms, et cetera, that need a home. So we're able to divert product into the food recovery system as well. So I thank everybody for having me. Kelsey made a comment. I saw the panelists, and although I may be one of the industry people, I do see quite a bit of people with PhDs, and I'm not one of them. So I wanted to make sure you guys give me some grace on that.
That's funny. Yeah, we went through the same public school system, so we're lucky if we could spell PhD, but that's another story. So, when we walk through the supply chain and we talk about edible food donation, especially on a larger scale, it takes the help of national chains. And one of the first to do this and do it well was Cheesecake Factory. We're very honored to have another PhD, a food scientist, Dr. Al Baroudi, who's the Vice President of Quality Assurance and Food Safety for Cheesecake Factory. So Dr. Al, if you could kind of give us a little background on you and how, briefly how you started your program.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mike, to get me on. I'm honored to be on the panel, although I'm on vacation, quickly, but I love to be here. And I want to say to Kelsey, welcome, Kelsey, and I'm a colleague as well. I get my master's degree, food science and technology from UC Davis back in the years. So you are not alone here. Anyway, I started with Cheesecake Factory about 13 years ago. And Cheesecake Factory, just for you who doesn't know, we have close to 300 restaurants now. That will include Cheesecake Factory, Grand Lux Cafe, Social Monk, North Italia, and Flower Child. And as you all know, our menu is so great and so big, at least 250 items we have on the menu. This will make my job very challenging to make sure that all the supply and raw material are available in every restaurant, because everything we serve to our guests are made to order in the restaurant from fresh ingredients every day. We do not have like central kitchen that we make the food and then we ship them and heat them up or whatever to serve to the guests. So everything is made to order from fresh items in every restaurant. We are in almost across the country. I believe we are in 42 states domestically, and we are 100% owned. We do not have any franchisee. We have also outside the US, we are international in 3 regions in the Middle East, China and Mexico, using licensing agreement people to work with us, not franchisee in a way like everybody knows it. Okay, we are listed on the Fortune 100 best companies to work for. I believe we are on the 8th year now on that list, which is continuous, which is great. And we do have 2 factories that produce the cakes that ship to the restaurants. And as I said, I joined the company about 13 years ago to start the food safety department and quality assurance department. And I will give it back to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Al. I appreciate it. Next up, when we talk about innovators in the industry, we're really fortunate to have John Votava. John is the Director of Corporate Affairs for Kroger, the Ralph's division. And John in Kroger especially has been such an innovator in food waste reduction and ending food insecurity. So John, if I could turn over to you to say a few words and talk about kind of what Kroger does in this space and how it started, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Votava, Director of Corporate Affairs for the Kroger Company, representing the Ralph's division out here in California. In California, we have Ralph's and Food for Less and Foods Co. up in Northern California. In California, we have about 320 stores and about almost 30,000 employees. Kroger, if you want to take a look at the entire scale, we are about 2,700 stores across the country in about 32 states. And we are employing about 500,000 associates as well. So about 3.5 years ago, we realized a fundamental abnormality is existing, that 40% of the food that was produced in the US was going to waste, while 1 in 5 people was struggling with not knowing where their next meal was coming from. And we knew we needed to do something about that. So we started our Zero Hunger, Zero Waste social impact plan. And with that, we are working to end hunger in our communities and eliminate waste within our company by the year 2025. And so how we do that is the food that we can't sell, we donate. And we have a national agreement with Feeding America and the local Feeding America chapters. So out here, we work with each county chapter for Feeding America, and we donate the product that we can't sell. So last year in California alone, Ralph's and Food for Less donated, I believe it was 10 million pounds of food and over $5 million to hunger relief organizations. And that equates to about 25 million meals last year alone. For the broad perspective for Kroger, our goal is 3 billion meals served by the year 2025. And we've been able to achieve 1 billion meals. Last year, we hit that number, and it equated to 10 meals every second of every day donated. So, you know, it's a big job. We're trying to make a dent, but our big goal is to end hunger. And so, you know, we're grateful to be a part of the panel today and looking forward to sharing some good information.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it very much. So now we want to move into the restaurant side of it, the food service end of it. I want to introduce to you Scott Kleckner. Scott's the Retail and Restaurant Director for BELCAMPO Group. We've known Scott for many years in his role with Patina Restaurant Group originally. But Scott, like a lot of us here, are industry lifers. So Scott, if you could kind of give us an introduction.
Yeah, and it's good. Joe got it out of the way. I don't have a PhD, and I'm also a regional operator these days. Yeah, so I've been involved with Waste Not OC turned Abound Food Care since about 2014. At the time, I was overseeing Patina Restaurant Group's businesses with Walt Disney Company. I typically do restaurant turnaround, so I'm a couple jobs past that. Currently at BELCAMPO Meat Co., a climate positive, carbon negative farming operation with 27,000 acres on the northern edge of the state, where we raise grass-fed, grass-finished, humane handled organic beef, pork, poultry, lamb, and my charter is to sell those products through our restaurants and butcher shops. So that's a good brief introduction for now, and I look forward to participating in the panel today, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it very much. So now for the last panelist, we're actually going to go to the portion of the food supply chain that I think is one of the most complicated because it's not as easy. There's moving parts to it, and that is catering services. So today we have Andrew Zdarsik, and I'm sorry if I butchered your name. I should be better at pronouncing difficult names, but I apologize. Andrew's a West Coast Regional Director of Culinary Operations for Flagship Culinary Services. And again, a really difficult dynamic that he has to deal with. So Andrew, if you could kind of introduce yourself and what you're doing through Flagship, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. As Mike said, my name is Andrew Zdarsik. I'm with Flagship Culinary Services, overseeing our West Coast culinary operations. We started our food recovery program in 2019 here in California with a la carte and Loaves and Fishes, who I sit on the board of directors for Loaves and Fishes as well. We're in an interesting predicament where we have got clients from healthcare to education to large corporations that want to have these extravagant kitchens with no idea of how many people they're going to feed every day. They can project it within a few hundred, a few thousand, depending on the day. So we've got a large responsibility to prepare mass amounts of food while being fiscally responsible, running a business, and also doing our best to finding out what we can do with that, which is really what brings us into the relationships we have now with Loaves and Fishes Family Kitchen and a la carte, and being able to get that food back into the community where there is a great need, because the majority of our clients and the people that we create and prepare food for have the budgets and have the social awareness and want to be able to provide back. I've been in the industry about 20 years. I wore the chef coat long before the sports coat, and happy to be here with all of you. I'm not a PhD as well, and I feel like I'm a line cook who's done okay for himself.
That's great. I love it. I appreciate it. So just so you know how we're working this day, first of all, my name is Mike Leorakis. I serve as the Executive Director of Abound Food Care, and I chair the Edible Food Recovery Technical Council for CRRA. Our goal today is to bring this panel together to be able to show everybody and have a discussion. So it's going to be a lot of back and forth amongst each other. We'll also be able to take some questions, because that's really what we're trying to do. But I wanted to be able to give these various perspectives. And we want to start it off again kind of with the supply chain. So we're going to fire off some questions. And again, panelists, feel free to respond to anything, any question. We'd love the back and forth. So we're going to start, if we can. Right now, we're going to go with Steve Brazil to start off with. Steve, you're a produce lifer. So you've been in the fields your whole life. How much excess edible produce is left in the field, or that you find is still in the food supply chain somewhere? And then what are the challenges that might prevent us from rescuing produce for human consumption?
That's a great question. Yeah, the best numbers that we come up with or that we use are most acceptable are in that 30% range, and that can be for a number of reasons. That typically it's the produce is too big or too small, or might have some blemishes, that make it difficult to market. And we all know that there are companies out there that are trying to market those ugly fruits, if you will. But for us, when we're looking at it from a standpoint of how do we get all of those, or capture that food. And I think that the things that prevent it, the easiest things to work on are the super quick reaction, right? I mean, this is extremely perishable. As a farmer, I may have a lettuce crop that looks great today. Today's Wednesday or today's Tuesday. By Friday, my field man can call me and say, this field is ready to go today. And with the warm weather this weekend, if we don't harvest it by Sunday, it's over the hill and gone by Monday. So, how do we react that quickly to be able to try to rescue that product? And, so that quick reaction and kind of being able to see around corners is important. But I think the things that are equally as important are having consistent, offtake agreements for that product or programs in place. The USDA program has been phenomenal. We've delivered over 40, we're getting close to 40 million pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables that we've delivered under that program, and in just under a year. But we've been living month to month on that contract, not year to year or quarter to quarter. So there's no consistency in knowing what you're going to need. If there was some sort of program that we had a customer and or organization that we knew would take those, and we had, let's say, a year-long runway, then we could become efficient, find where those products are, locate them in the food chain, and rescue them. And the other thing too is it's equally important to educate the farmers to the business and tax benefit. So get a clear understanding of hey, if you're going to disc up a crop anyways, and we can come in there and rescue it, and you can donate it instead of disking it, then that creates some tax benefit that they may not be aware of. So coupling some sort of offering with an explanation of how it makes sound business sense to be a good steward of the land and a good upstanding member of the community can be kind of win-win. So it's all kind of centered around that educational piece and being able to move lightning quick to get this product out of the ground and into people's homes.
Yeah, and now, Kelsey, if you could jump in here also. You've had the benefit of interviewing over 35 growers, if I'm not mistaken. Can you kind of share some of the challenges that you found in chatting with other growers as well?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So we did do a project where we interviewed 35 growers in California, growers of leafy greens, peaches, and tomatoes. And we were looking to figure out what are the greatest challenges and opportunities for food recovery in California. Echoing a lot of what Steve said, I think we found kind of two buckets of challenges for food recovery. The first bucket being economic or logistical challenges, and the second being social or relational challenges. So on the economic logistical side, financial viability is often the greatest challenge for recovery programs, because food recovery often involves the same costs and logistical requirements as traditional food supply chains, but with lower or even no anticipated profits. The financial viability of any recovery model can be pretty tenuous. Providing compensation for growers is one way to help offset the challenges of labor and infrastructure. So for example, we talked to a bunch of food banks who were able to compensate growers with a pick and pack out fee to at least cover the costs of transportation and harvest. So growers weren't making money on that transaction, but at least they weren't losing money. But even when the money's there, there's often additional logistical barriers to overcome. So we heard lots of folks in interviews talking about challenges around scale and labor and infrastructure. And then there were social and relational barriers. So, certain assumptions or misunderstandings on the side of some partners created a reluctance to engage in food recovery. And also food recovery is often a long-term partnership that requires investment of time and attention in order to realize long-term benefits. And so that can be an additional challenge when folks don't have the time to invest in that kind of relationship.
No, I appreciate that. And so Scott, if we can have you jump in here also. You're both a retailer and also a food service operator. So, and again, I'd like everybody, I'd like to go to everybody eventually on this question. Can you talk to us about the importance of brand protection or how it relates to liability? What's the dynamic between the two? What's the concern?
Yeah, I think early on in conversations about food recovery, what the nonprofit world was hearing was liability that we were scared it wasn't going to be handled safely. Somebody was going to get sick. But often the liability issue that I was hearing as an obstacle was brand. And using the very specific example, when we first met, I was leasing over 20% of downtown Disney in Anaheim. And any product I donated from there was tied to my client, not just my landlord, but my partner, which was Disney. And so there's a whole conversation that has to occur about the protection of the brand image, the value of those items, that they're special, in addition to making sure that it's handled safely and responsibly. And no different in my current role. I mean, we have 9 figures of investment in building a brand. That brand allows us, along with kind of the merits of our product, to often command 40% up to 10 times more for what is a similar product to another brand's that does not have that same value. So its brand is my most valuable asset in my current role as well.
Great. And guys, panelists, if you don't mind, why don't you go ahead and leave your cameras on so we can see your lovely shining faces at all times, if you don't mind. John, I want to go to you on that as a follow-up. What's the focus for Kroger? What's the big concern? Is it liability? Is it brand? Is it both?
And very similar to what Scott just talked about is, we are in the same boat. We are providing product that comes right off our shelves, goes into a pack, and is picked up by a food bank that picks it up, takes it out, and hopefully is distributing it rather quickly to the community. And a lot of it has that little Ralph's logo on it, or Food for Less, or Kroger. We just need to make sure that our food bank partners are maintaining that and keeping it safe, and keeping the temperatures controlled, so that it reaches the end destination safely and effectively. And we're doing our part to nourish people. Obviously, I don't think anybody here wants to see people getting sick from something that may have gone out of temperature, but freshness is key, and making sure that those items do stay fresh in getting to the end destination is our top priority. Safety is our top priority.
Right. Andrew, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I agree with what everyone said. It's brand protection for someone like us. We're not out there talking about Flagship Culinary. We don't have our name on anything that's going out, but it's more of brand recognition. We want to be associated with it. We want people to know what we're doing. We want it to be an association of giving this back out to the community. And there's also, from the safety aspect of that, Scott said it, there was that big liability aspect early on for the nonprofits. But what's changed is we're not looking at donating what needs to be discarded. We're looking at perfectly good food that we'd happily serve to our customers, handling it in a proper temperature, and making sure that that gets back out to the community. So it's not taking things that should be in the landfill and going out. It's taking things that have no reason to go into a landfill and getting them into the community.
Right. And since you brought it up, we always talk about the importance of food safety as a way of protecting our brand. So Dr. Al, quite honestly, you are the food safety guru, not just in our group, but nationally. You've been doing it for many, many years. So explain to me, when you put together the Cheesecake Factory program, how important was food safety to protect that Cheesecake brand?
Thank you, Mike. It is very, very important. And not only that, I'd like to add, before I go any further, that there is the liability protection that given to us by the government. Actually, this is a law that passed by the government. Federal law in 1996 was passed. It's the Emerson Good Samaritan Food Act bill, which in a way stated that if you donate wholesome, good food to a nonprofit organization that will be fed to needy people, you are protected from civil and criminal liability. So this is very, very important to know. And many people didn't know that. And that's why they try to stay away from donating this good food instead of going to the landfill or going to waste. They are protected, and the brand is protected, providing, as I said, the food is given in a safe, wholesome, and a good way. So we have a program that we called Harvest Program before even Waste Not came about, and before the Abound food program came about. We had it at Cheesecake Factory, and this program. Let me elaborate a little bit more about this program. We kind of identified food that can be donated, okay, and then we like what kind of food we are going to donate. Again, has to be wholesome, has to be cooked, has to be safe. And then we store them in a different container, different colored container within the restaurant. So everybody will know that those are the food that's going to be donated to the Harvest Program. And then we weigh them and label them and add them on a form, complete a form. And that form will be faxed to the corporate office, and the tax department will take care of it from this point on. We made a lot of money, saving money in a way of tax benefit from this program. Let's see. We also, I want to mention something that Steve mentioned also. We have our sustainability department. They looked into the ugly, what we call the ugly food, the ugly produce. And we have a very good program for that now, that we use them in, like, say, mashed potato. Things that's not going to be presented to the guests. They're not going to see it. It's going to be in the kitchen, and perfectly good food, except the shape and the color is not the correct one. So we use those as part of this program as well. And I want to mention a couple of things here also. Let's see, I have some notes here. Okay. Today there's a 1 billion person on the earth, worldwide, are hungry. 1 billion. Okay. And in the wasted food, then we can talk about two kinds of wasted food. Wasted food that can be like during production, like from the supply chain, like what Steve was talking about. And as well as the wasted food that comes out from the restaurant, from supermarket, from home. In other words, overproduced and underused. So those kind of two things, if we take care of all of those things, we will have enough to feed 3 billion people, just for saving from those two items. And by 2050, year 2050, I believe the population on the earth will be close to 9 billion. And based on that, the United Nations, they have some kind of goals that set out, and 12.3 says we must reduce the wasted food by 50% before 2030 in order to be able to secure food for everybody on earth. So if there's no way, if we increase the production by 70% to be able to feed those 9 billion people in 2015, it's going to be, it cannot be done. So it has to be a combination, reducing the waste and increasing production to be able to feed those people. Let's see, what else? I think, food safety is very, very important to protect the brand. So we don't take it very lightly, we take it very seriously. And that's why I created the department. That's why I came on board about 13 years ago to the company to study the program, the food safety, and part of the program was the what we call the harvest program, which is now donating the extra food. And where does this extra food comes from in our system? Actually, that comes from 3 different places. The first one is food overproduced and not used. So those are being put on the side for the harvest program, or food coming up during the training program. We have a lot of people, a lot of staff members in every restaurant. And I think you all recognize that everywhere you go in Cheesecake Factory, you order one plate, it's always the same in every restaurant, everywhere across the world, that is. And why is that? It's because of training. So we spend a lot of time and food in training the cooks on the line to achieve that perfect plate made. And most of the time they produce too much food for training purposes, and that food also very good and very wholesome put aside for the harvest program to be donated. And also another source for this kind of thing is the ingredient. In other words, we have more produce like on hand or more rice produced and so on. Those can be also given to the harvest program. So this is in a nutshell what we do and how we do it at Cheesecake Factory.
Well, and thank you. And, you know, when we look at food recovery in California, currently it's kind of a hodgepodge. I mean, the reality is that we rely on nonprofit agencies and efforts, and nonprofits are reliant on volunteers, and their staffing levels ebb and flow, their skill sets ebb and flow. So food safety is always somewhat of an issue. And we see it done differently all over the state. So for an example, when we first started getting into this, you know, we would see some recovery agencies that would recover hot food. Some donors would not mind donating hot food. So I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to start going back to you, Dr. Al. How do you mitigate temperature? Do you only donate product at a certain temperature? What's your philosophy on that?
Well, actually, again, the only food that are donated are the wholesome and good food. And what I mean by that is when the food is produced, it has to go through the cooling process properly. It has to be stored properly. Hot food stored hot, cold food stored cold. And we maintain all of that. And we keep records for all of this product, not only for the donated food, for our food as well, that's produced for the guests. So same program applied to our guests is applied to the food that we are going to be donated. So maintaining the temperature, I mean, the process, we have a process in place to make sure that all the food are within the approved temperature control process all the way from when we receive it until we donate it.
Okay, and Andrew, how do you mitigate time and temperature?
I mean, it's definitely a focus to, you know, there's a pathway to donate hot product, but the safest way to go about it is ensure that everything's cooled. Most things that are going out our doors are the previous day's dishes that we've had full opportunity, whether it was from a midday or an evening service, to fully cool that in a proper amount of time, get it nice and packaged up, and then get it out to our partners. You know, I fully believe there are pathways of looking at hot food donations, but for a long-term, large-scale mass donation, you really got to look at the cooling process, and that's my opinion of the best way to move forward.
Okay.
And I might add, Mike, we have special area in every restaurant in the walk-in cooler just for the harvest program, and that's how we make sure that, you know, all the food maintained cold until it's picked up.
Right. So for those,
Mike, can I circle back real quick on the brand protection and give a perspective on that as well that kind of dovetails with this food safety and the temperature control? The perspective I wanted to give is us as a food co-packer. So we're processing for other companies that are selling into retail. So a product that John may have at a Kroger facility may have been manufactured for us and it's branded. For whatever reason, sometimes that product will go long or what have you. And that contractor that we contract with to manufacture that food will have reluctance about getting that product into the recovery system to protect their brand because they're concerned through the logistics process, through the inevitable end user result, whatever that be, a kitchen or what have you, that they're going to be able to protect that product as well. So I think there needs to be education as well as through the regulation to assure these people that the social impact of them making this donation is boundless because their employees feel good about it. There's such a positive aspect to this. However, there's still a reluctance on their part because there's this little part that telling them, is my box going to be there and it's not going to be handled properly, it's not going to get there. So that we need to get past that and make sure that they understand through education that the logistics system is in place to be able to support that at controlled temperature all throughout, that there's support out there to assure that those temp controls are there, to document that, and then to make sure that when the food is ultimately being used, whether through a recovery kitchen or whatever aspect that is, that's being handled in many cases better than a consumer would handle it because they're professionals. But that's an important aspect because there is reluctance on their part to protect their brand and make sure that they can control that throughout.
Well, you touched on something else right now that's really important. When it comes to the outreach component, you just described restaurateurs, food service people. we are not going to say yes right away. I mean, it's difficult to get us to commit to something, and there's got to be a comfort level. So even in the outreach, we need to be able to show them a potential donor, the steps that are being taken to protect the food, to protect the integrity, and ultimately protect the brand. And it's going to take repetition. It's not going to happen right away because, again, by nature of the nonprofit sector that we have to rely on, we may be great today and good tomorrow. We need to get to the point where we're consistent all the time. So to that end, I want to ask all of you who have multi-unit operations. So John with retail grocery, those of you who have multiple restaurants, what is the importance of having a system-wide solution? I mean, isn't there a comfort level of knowing that wherever you have locations, you're going to have food recovery done a certain way? And John, I'm going to go to you because I know that was something you addressed early on.
Right, and that was something that Kroger corporate stepped up to do, was to build that relationship with Feeding America nationwide. And then it just gave us kind of open doors in each county where we could just go and work with the local Feeding America representatives there and build a program. And just because we work with Feeding America doesn't mean Feeding America comes to all of our 320 stores in the state. What they do is basically they farm it out to organizations that have been approved and pass their standards and meet their standards. And, so they will send those groups out that will come to our stores, collect. And so they take the, the produce, the proteins, the dairy items, and they will take those so that they can get those out more quickly to the actual communities that they serve. So that is one of the key benefits of having that system-wide capability. Now, working with some of these smaller organizations, we often find that sometimes some of their resources may not be there. So we're working with them to buy them forklifts or buy them, hand trucks or something like that. And even in some cases, we're buying trucks and vans and vehicles to help in this food rescue process and assist in making sure that it's a smooth process and getting the food collected and getting it out to where it needs to be.
Okay. So when we talk about regional, and again, I'm talking to the food industry people. When we talk about regional, when we talk about food recovery, we're typically talking about counties. So a group of cities is a region. Can you guys, and I'm going to start with you, Steve, as a food industry person, as a grower, what does the food industry, how do we define regions?
Well, yeah, your guess is as good as mine. When they define local, it's really, we just go with what the customer tells us. So, but generally speaking, if it's a location that is located, somewhere near a farming area, 100 miles seems to be kind of the accepted number. And then when you're located maybe not as close to a farming area, I've seen, 400 or 500 miles being designated. John could probably tell you exactly what their policy is on it. So yeah, those are what's defined. I've heard other states, California does a pretty good job, but when you go to other states, I don't know if you've seen it, when you go to like South Carolina, they're super excited about growing in South Carolina, and they're super focused on that. And I don't think they look at miles, they look at a state border. So I think you can look at that. It's a pretty flexible number, you can use it any way that you want, but there definitely is a focus on our end with customers that are trying to define that local, and then also when we're working on our, in addition to the USDA program, we're doing our privately funded program with those areas, those 501c3s and other food banks. They seem to be really interested in kind of local components for their boxes as well, so that their recipients can receive, locally grown produce, just like we all have access to when we go to our grocery store.
And then Joe, as a distributor, as a processor and distributor, where food's at. I mean, so what's regional to a distributor?
Well, we would define local as Southern California. So we would define local from probably Fresno south. We would define regional as probably the Western states, whether that be, we would kind of take maybe New Mexico, Colorado West as being a region. But we do everything on a national scale as well. So food is sourced for us, if we're sourcing from the East Coast, that's kind of the truck, that's where there's difficulty in logistics. If we're sourcing from anywhere from Idaho or Utah, Nevada, Arizona, except that it's from a logistical point of view, it's very, very, very easy for us to do that. So I think we would really kind of split the country into three. We'd have West, Central, East is how we would define the regions.
Yeah, and Scott, I know recently you had an issue with one of your stores in New York. Can you explain the dynamic between having a solution in one part of the country, but not having a solution in another part?
Yeah, I'll first back up and say, as a restaurant operator, regional is trade area, which sometimes is one street or one intersection. And even currently now, I'm having dramatically different experiences at my restaurant in Oakland versus the one in West Hollywood versus my opportunity to succeed or not yet in downtown LA versus San Mateo, California. So for us in the restaurant business, when we talk about a region, it's like 3rd Street from this block to this block is a trade area. And if you go a mile from there, it's a totally different trade area. Yeah, highlighting on the issue I recently had, which was pretty painful. I had hundreds of thousands of dollars of wholesome, organic meat in cold storage in New York. The pandemic's been brutal to the restaurant industry. I had 9 locations a year ago. I'm operating 3 today and excited to get 2 of the closed ones reopened, and the rest basically like the Titanic. We had to walk away. I had a lot of wholesome product in cold storage there. The charity network in New York is currently buying product, whether it was the contacts I had with Jose Andreas's people or some of the bigger charities I worked with when I was with Patina that did a lot of work out there. The reality is nobody wanted my donated product. And it was because they wanted to buy product from their existing vendors. They set up a sustainable, long-term solution, which is right for their charities. I'm not judging how they work, but I am saying the reality is my goal always is to have food, not go into what we used to call the pig bucket in the back of the restaurant, which is, old school waste diversion was the pig farmer would pick up and save us on our hauling costs, but instead feed to people. On a much smaller level, when I was opening barbecue restaurants on the East Coast, when we would open a restaurant, we would, like Al mentioned, do a lot of training. I mean, Cheesecake Factory is a busy restaurant. They're training hundreds of employees. And in my barbecue days, similarly, we would be training a lot of people and cooking food for days. The first day, the woman shelter up the block was so happy that we rolled up there with a cart of meat. The second day, we were overwhelming them. By the third day, we bought them a chest freezer. And by the 4th day, we found 2 other charities that we already filled their freezers. And at that point, when your focus is and should be the couple hundred people that you're employing, the business you're opening, the investors that you're doing that for, at some point it turns into waste because at times the system's broken. As a busy restaurant operator, you can only go so far. I've been blessed in California that our network, led by Mike, has been able to always help me in any situation. All of the relationships in the world and all of my history and work experience in New York, I effectively had to waste, what would have fed a lot of people some really good, healthy product.
Yeah, I think therein lies one of those complexities that most don't realize. They think it's as simple as here's available food, here's a nonprofit. The reality is that not all of that food can go to the same nonprofit all the time. So it's a changing dynamic from one day to the next. Kelsey, as part of your study, you identified the cost factor associated with it. Do you see any benefits of working on a more regional or national basis to develop capacity? Is there a cost advantage to that? Please give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there can be. I think there can definitely be cost benefits to approaching food recovery from a large scale. But at the same time, I think one of the big lessons from our research was that a lot of the logistical barriers to agricultural food recovery are highly specific and variable. So they're crop specific, they're region specific. The system you design to recover carrots is not going to help you recover spinach or peaches. So I think national Our regional approaches can really help incentivize food recovery and build relationships among stakeholders, but the actual work of recovering food from farms is going to require a lot of attention to the context-specific details on the ground. So, for example, food recovery often involves specialized harvesting processes, different equipment, more packaging or food storage or cold storage, or retraining labor on different quality specifications. So it's really hard for me to think of like a one-size-fits-all solution to food recovery on the farm.
Okay, Joe, as a USDA inspected facility, you have an added level of regulation. You deal with an entity, a regulator, USDA, that has different guidelines than a county health department would. Can you share how that complicates, food donation?
Well, quite frankly, I think that anytime there's any type of variation from a SOP or an operating process that you have that's documented within your HACCP plan, the USDA is going to tag it. I'll give you a specific instance of that. We missed a logging of a temp, not the temp. The temp was logged electronically, but we missed a logging of the temp. The product was tagged, could not move. We appealed it up to the district office and said, our process shows that we did this. We have an electronic measurement that shows that we temped it properly. We just did not literally mark it on a sheet. It was rejected and we had to destroy the product. We went to them and said, can we donate this product? And the answer was no. And a USDA inspector, we had to order in bins from Baker Commodities. The USDA inspector stood there whilst our staff had to open up product and dump it into a bin to be hauled away to make sure it was being destroyed. And I wanted to touch on another point about that as well that's happening now, and not to switch on you, Mike, but both Kelsey and Scott spoke of this about cold storage. One of the things that's happened also through COVID is there's been a pivot. Cold storage right now is unavailable, simply unavailable. I think you've experienced that, Mike, also via email to me. Lineage, which is the largest cold storage company in the nation, if not the world, is adding millions of square feet of storage. And one of the dynamics that's happened is there's been a pivot, and I don't know if Andrews can touch on this as well, but you're seeing a lot of direct consumer products that are going now, and there's being fulfillment done out of cold storage. So it's just very, very, very difficult to be able to get product into cold storage. But again, from the USDA perspective, and the fix on that is there needs to be an effort put in through the regulation process where they understand that product is safe. It may miss a label, but it's safe, and it's safe to get into the food recovery system, whether it be relabeled, even if it doesn't go into commerce. The fact of the matter is they consider anything that leaves the building as into commerce, and it subjects a manufacturer as us up to a recall. So if we were to donate product that we said did not meet a spec, or we missed in this instance, we missed a temperature log, and we were to donate that, theoretically, through backtracking, through paperwork, the USDA could find that through an audit, and we would have to undergo a recall of that product. Which is extremely expensive and is not good for our brand altogether as well. So it's a cumbersome process dealing with the USDA, and there needs to be an effort to have legislation that somehow addresses this and has some reforms put in place, because there's a tremendous amount of product that's available, and the logistics are there with companies like ours. We have refrigerated trucks. We know how to handle products safely. We can get the product from A to B and want to do that. We understand if we made a tactical error and didn't log something, we'll take responsibility for that. But dumping the product into a bin is not the answer. Getting that product into being used is the answer, but we're not allowed to do that at this point.
Yeah, so let me ask each of you. So, and I can share my numbers. You don't have to share if you don't like, but the average profit margin of a restaurant in California is between 6 and 8%. And I think retail grocery from my days in the business was closer to 3%. That could have changed. That was 30 years ago. So I don't know how lower now. Holy smoke. So if our profit margins are low and food is money, then what are the barriers that you see from us being able to donate more in order to take advantage of tax advantages of that? In other words, I don't think the average consumer, or even in our audience right now, I don't think they, most people understand the profit margin in the food industry. And if food is money to us, then what do we need to do and how can we get more food to people? And I'll throw that out to anybody who wants to take that question.
Mike, I'll start on that, and I'll start it from a very practical point of view. We don't want to have a budget for food that we have to donate, but it's inevitable. So it's part of our cost structure. For somebody like us, a manufacturer, or maybe for somebody like John, inevitably there's going to be product that's going to be short code. There's going to be number twos. So, our margins increase. Obviously, the more efficient we produce, the more effective we are, and we're going to get a better margin. But inevitably, we are going to end up with product that has to get into a recovery system that we don't want to get into the landfills. So there's an inevitability, I guess, is what I'm getting at, whether or not the margins are touched. Our margins are historically low in the food service industry. First service distribution, historically low. If everything goes right at the end of the year, if we can get a point to a point and a half, we're doing things right.
Anybody else want to take
one
that
more
on?
thing also, Mike.
Sure.
We need to remember the food recovery hierarchy program. I mean, this is like a triangle. And the base is, there's three things here. Number one is to prevent. Number two is to recover. Number three is to recycle. To prevent is to reduce the amount that goes unused or unsold. Okay, meaning as an operator, you have to be able to manage, the procedure, the production, what have you, your schedule. Now, recover, you have to donate the surplus to hungry people. Okay, this is like the second step. The third step is to recycle, meaning to divert the unused food from the landfill, meaning send it to make it to animal feed, make it to compost so they can reuse it again. So those type of things, I mean, we need to keep in mind there's the food recovery hierarchy to when we manage our food. This also affect the cost and so on.
Right.
No, I'll just go back. Oh, sorry, go on.
Thanks, Scott. Sorry about that. Just to touch a little bit on what Kelsey mentioned before too, and also what Al mentioned about the prevention, the very first step, and we are the very first step, the source of the product, the production level. So creating, again, I look at it from a standpoint of almost, we're on the supply side. If we can find folks that have the distribution, I'm turning it back the other way and saying, we've got the supply, where's the distribution to get it out to the communities in need, that final mile piece, all those, parts that go along with it. And when we're talking about, a tiny margin business, farming is very similar, might be even lower than what we're talking about there. So if as farmers, we're going into the season planning on donating a portion of our crop, we're not going to be in business very long. There's a pathway that we've seen that some of these charities have, small amounts of funding to get to make it happen to what they do. So our goal is to try to collaborate and try to find a way to have other stakeholders that can contribute to the program to get it all out there. Because as Kelsey mentioned, there's specific equipment needs. There's very specific needs that an apple farmer in Washington has versus a lettuce farmer in Salinas in terms of the ability to quickly manage their crop. Potatoes, apples, and onions, they have some time. They can play with it. They can work on storage and control the atmosphere and stuff like that. But some of these other items that represent, I think, the larger part of the pie because they are so perishable, those have a specialized need. And the industry has that supply chain expertise. It just needs to be turned loose on it and made more efficient. All the pieces are there. It's the age-old question: who's going to pay for it? And again, like when you're creating alternative small revenue streams for small farmers that they wouldn't normally have, it's a piece of the overall pie, not a major part of their income. That's what creates this long-term sustainability on the ranch and keeps young people interested in feeding this country.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll just backtrack. Yeah, restaurant margins, it's an 80% failure rate within the first 2 years of business. Most businesses I've run, 10% profit would be wildly successful. A kind of ancillary benefit of food recovery is the old premise of what gets measured gets managed. So, successful food donation partnerships often mean that the donations go down from the source that was providing it. They took that information and said, wow, that's great that we donated 1,000 pounds last month. Why did we overproduce? Why did we overspend? And so it's, you don't have to talk to a restaurant operator about doing the right thing. That's why we do what we do. We like feeding people. We like community. We generally are quietly philanthropic. But if you can then also turn back and say, listen, here's an opportunity to reduce waste, here's information you could use to better manage your business, that's just an added benefit that helps us promote and share the practice.
Mike, if I can jump in real quick.
Please do.
You were saying 3% for grocery industry. It's actually probably closer to 1% to 2%. Kind of crazy. So we look for cost savings wherever we can. If we can get that tax benefit, that's fantastic. But what we do in other ways is Ralph's and Food for Less back in, I think it was 2013, 2014, we built an anaerobic digester at our facility in Compton. So the food that we can't donate, we send back to that digester where we churn it up, we mix it with runoff water from our creamery at our distribution center there. Turns it into a slurry that becomes a methane gas that powers generators, that powers a portion of our facility. And so that's why we join these calls and surround ourselves with PhDs and entrepreneurs, because we know that we're not smart enough to do this alone, and we need to partner with these people who have these bright ideas. And actually it segues into through our Zero Hunger, Zero Waste efforts in our foundation, we've created a $10 million innovation fund that we're working to partner with entrepreneurs and people with these big, bright ideas on how can we eliminate that waste? How can we eliminate hunger in the communities? And we are willing to put some skin in the game too to help fund some of those ideas. So it takes partnership and it takes collaboration to really make a big dent in this problem.
And John, as a company, you're following that hierarchy of food waste. In other words, you're feeding people first, and then by going to anaerobic digestion, you're providing biofuel and a mulch, et cetera. So, that's really impressive. Kelsey, I want to ask you, and Steve also, we hear it all the time. What is the link between sustainable farming and edible food recovery?
Well, maybe Steve has a better answer than me. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I'll go first, and then you can clean it up and make it look good. But yeah, we look at it like, I was reading somewhere, and that's all I do now is think about this stuff now that I've been involved with it for the last year. It's kind of taken over my life. But it makes sense. If we disc 20% of our lettuce crop for any reason, we've wasted 20% of the water, 20% of the fertilizer, 20% of the land, 20% of every input, man hours, every single thing that we put into that crop has been wasted. And if you start looking at it from that standpoint as a measurable and say all the acres times X amount of water times this, that, and the other, the amount of water would be billions. Now, how do you change that? You can't unwater a field after you've already watered it, but you can feed people with that extra 20%, which spreads that out. Then that means you've been a good steward of the resources and utilized them to what they were intended for. So when I look at it from a sustainable farming standpoint, I look at it from that part, which meets the green definition. I guess by nature all farmers are environmentalists. If we don't take care of the land, we're out of business. But that kind of shows, that kind of showcases, that part of it. And then also, again, I keep coming back to, and it's probably just like restaurateurs, the margins are so thin that when you go to a farmer and you're saying that let's take a little bit more of that 1%, as in the form of a donation, is very difficult. But when we create avenues to get this food out to people, and whether it's a tiny bit of margin on their bottom line or none whatsoever, you've created the machine to get the stuff off the field without putting the additional benefit on the farmer to come up with a creative way to harvest something that they're not going to get paid for and donate it. And so we just have to get kind of creative and come up with some solutions that can accomplish that.
Yeah.
I want to totally underscore everything Steve just said about the environmental costs of food loss, and also say that, if food is going to be lost, actually the farm is the best place for it to happen. If it's lost at the farm, obviously that's not great, that's not ideal, but it's distant to the ground, it's fed to animals, it's not going into a landfill. The further you get along the supply chain, when those losses happen, the environmental costs just really go up exponentially. And I also want to touch on something that Al brought up about that food recovery pyramid and thinking about, prevention. When we look at what really drives the supply of recoverable food on farms, it's really market fluctuations and quality specifications from buyers. So, to the extent that we can manage oversupply and tweak some of these quality specifications to allow for greater variation in what's acceptable, that can really help prevent a lot of the food loss on farms.
Well, and John, now, aren't your buyers in essence buying based on consumer demand?
That's the hope. Yeah, we are, it's a little unpredictable as the pandemic has proven to us, but we think we have a pretty good idea of who's buying what and when. And so, we continue those trends. And when we see some locations that have higher donations, then we can kind of go in and we can kind of correct some of those, purchasing options and opportunities that we have for that store too. So it does give us a better insight into the business and how things are operating.
Okay, and let's go back out to the farm real quick. Are there seasonal factors? Again, I'm not a grower. I use it, but I don't grow it. Are there seasonal factors that come into play here?
Yeah, it's seasonal factors, weather factors. You have to remember, I'll just use lettuce because we've been talking about it. So today is April 6th, April, May, June. If you can tell me what the lettuce demand will be July 15th, you'd be my hero, because I need to make that, or collectively our company will make that decision today of what we're going to plant next week. And so that will be harvested in some future day. This pandemic has showed us that we can't expect anything, but historically we think we have some sort of relation to what's normal. So to Kelsey's point, our goal is to never overproduce. But if you've ever sold Ralph's, no offense, John, and you've told them that you're going to deliver them 20 loads of lettuce, and you call them on a Friday and say it's not 20 loads, it's 10, you might not ever get a purchase order from Ralph's again. So what you do is you grow 25 loads of lettuce to make sure you've got those 20 loads. And and so we always tend to kind of think like we don't want to let a customer down, so we'll grow a little bit extra. And again, to Kelsey's point, I do know that some of these chain stores are really working on changing their specifications a little bit to not find any reason to reject beautiful product. It would boggle your mind the product that gets rejected every single day at retailers across the United States. And it's an arms race though, because John can't put a subpar lettuce out there and say, well, it's because I'm helping the environment. And the next door, Pavilions has a beautiful head of lettuce for the same price. We're going to go to Pavilions and buy that one. So it's a heck of a dilemma. It's a tremendous challenge. But so the seasonality does come into it. Weather patterns do come into it. Whenever you hear about the desert, this summer, when you hear about it being 120 for 5 days out in Palm Springs, just know that whatever was growing out there died. And then so the price will go up on that. And there'll be a ton of bell peppers or whatever was growing out there that we're going to be going into the #1 retail market that now have sunburning and some other deficiencies that will make them a great candidate for rescued food, but not intentionally, is by accident.
Yeah.
I think that carries over to the restaurant side as well. I mean, if I could sit there and tell you that, we're going to do 3,143 people for lunch, they're going to eat 1.2 pounds of chicken, 9 ounces of green beans, I can call Steve and say, hey, this is how many green beans I'm going to serve, and then I have nothing to donate. That's the best case fiscal situation, because I've brought Nostradamus level forecasting to my, food production. It's impossible. If I could do that, I'd be working for all of you, telling you what to do,
So, okay, so I got to ask this question. Oh, go ahead, Dr. L. What was that?
I'm saying that this is why this program is very well needed. To have this kind of program, the donation program, because there's so many factors that we cannot control and it's beyond our control. So that's why it's very, very well in need.
Well, yeah, I agree. Now I got to ask you this: as an industry, if we look to build capacity with existing resources, what are the opportunities and what are the challenges? What are the concerns of a distributor, a retailer using your resources to help, because it's going to be less expensive. Let me preface this. If I ask every pantry in California what they need, they will all say they need a refrigerated truck. And then we have 25,000 refrigerated trucks zigzagging all over the place, burning up gas, and they're underutilized. When what we really want to do is look at what are those resources that are already out there and available. So Joe, I know you've had experience with this. I'm going to run it to you first. How realistic is it that we can utilize the food industry distribution resources, cold storage resources, although there is a shortage, but those existing resources to assist in this?
Well, from a logistic point of view, I think the food service operation, let's take two companies that operate in Southern California, US Foods and Cisco. And again, from a regional point of view, Ventura South to San Diego, they probably have 400 semis on the road every morning going out full. Every one of those is going back empty. And they're in every single city in Southern California. What needs to happen, Mike, is there needs to be education so that they understand that from a social impact, they're doing the right thing and they can benefit from that social message that they're getting out within their employees, within their customer base, and just within the general population. But it's nothing for them to make another stop, every one of those on the way back in. I think it's very, very, very realistic that they could stop, so long as they know that there's no liability on their point, pick up 2 pallets, drop it off someplace else on their way back in, every one of them. Think about that. If 500 trucks are picking up 2 pallets a day, we're picking up 1,000 pallets a day. That's moving logistically from one place to the other. It exists. It's an hour and a half of their time. And that's just 2 companies. That doesn't mean all the other companies that exist out there. I would also say at certain points that some of them have capacity. When they go out and they build a new facility, they have capacity to do that with ebbs and flows. Again, COVID has produced something where food service warehouses have emptied and it's shifted into a retail environment. If they feel secure that there's going to not be any liability on their part, I think realistically, they can operate as a complete logistic solution to be able to provide that need of that bridge in between the food availability and where the food needs to get to. And I know, you and I know, we've spoken before, our company always looks forward to do that. Our employees never question the fact that we're asking them to go to Second Harvest Food Base and pick something up and go over. I think they really have a feel-good feeling when they do that and know that our management of our company is doing what we can, other than just being trying to be a profit machine.
Yeah, and so for those in attendance that are watching this, many of you are responsible for doing capacity planning as part of SB 1383. I think it's wise for us to look when we look at capacity planning, that we look at all those resources that are available. And that's why I wanted to bring up, do you see downsides? Because for example, I know you've been stuck at a dock for a couple hours at a time before. I mean, and then there is some liability risk. If we mitigate those, what is realistically, can we, do you see any challenges, or can we look at having existing resources?
The only challenge would be if somebody were to kind of put an economic price tag on that. But again, I think through legislation and first of all, I think the economic impact of that, labor, specifically gas, et cetera, is fully offset by the positive message and the positive social impact that makes. So that's the message that needs to be brought across. Furthermore, if there could be legislation that there was incentives to do that, you'd see everybody going on that. So I think that's it. If there was any type of legislation that would incentivize that void would be filled immediately. Because now what we've done is we've matched capacity with need, right?
Right.
And there's an economic benefit to it.
Perfect. All right, so we're going to go to some questions pretty soon. But before we do, I want to thank everybody. We've been very fortunate to have a group of experts here from every angle. And again, I think the most complicated one probably is Andrew. And so Andrew, I got to ask you this question. Can you just explain to everybody the dynamic of having, unlike a restaurateur or a retailer, that can make that decision, you've got a partner in that your client has a say. Can you describe that, how that works?
I mean, we're an execution vendor for whomever our clients may be. And they've got their vision from a culinary perspective, what they want us to put out there. And they also have their own agenda to run their business, and we're there to feed their people. So they're not always thinking about the culinary side of the program. And I think it starts with really having that information, and almost back to that whole training concept of training your client partners and making them understand, not only what impact it can have, how utilizing a program like this could make everybody more operationally efficient. It'll give us a better understanding of waste. It'll give us a better understanding of how we can help. And also, a lot of the communities that are being supported in these food recovery programs are the communities that the people are living in, the employees, the cooks that they're bringing in. So it's just about opening that dialogue, forcing that conversation, and generally we find that everybody comes to the table and wants to do what's best. Because I couldn't even begin to tell you what the tax benefits are, but it's not about that. It's about the final impact to what is that, where is that product going to go? And again, not brand protection, but brand recognition. It's something that organizations want to be associated with.
Yeah, it's a great point. Great point. So if you don't mind, we want to open it up to questions. Do we have anybody that would like to ask some of our expert panelists questions? So Meredith, I'm going to ask you to jump in to see if we have any questions out there. If not, I'll ask a couple because I've got a lot of questions.
Hey, Mike, I got a question. Keith Bergthold.
Hi, Keith. Go right ahead.
Man, thank you so much for doing this. You guys are awesome. I learned so much today. I can't even begin to tell you. So thank you so much. I was just wondering if Kelsey could give us a link to her research piece so I don't have to buy the journal article.
Well, it's open access, but I would love to. I'll put a link in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Okay, any questions anybody would like to ask? All right, I'm going to ask one question then.
Mike, one just came up on the chat. You may want to read that.
Yeah, we just got one. Caitlin asked, how do your industries balance the desire for continual growth with managing potential waste?
Okay, now don't everybody rush to answer that at one time.
Well, I'm sorry, in the restaurant world, we're clawing back to get back where we were. Growth is not where we're at today. But I mean, I will say again, like any business, economies of scale improve things. As you grow, you typically have more resource, less constraints. So if anything, for me, typically, other than the example of being, having units that are somewhat orphaned from your hub of operations, like when I opened one across the country, for the most part, the more you open, the more talent you have, the more resources you have, the more storage, facility, infrastructure.
And Caitlin, I think one answer might be that, as discussed earlier, with profit margins that are pretty low, you survive. Volume cures all ills. In other words, you go after volume, and food to us is money. So as you manage growth, you want to control that loss or that the waste, because that's a dollar amount. And those dollars get bigger the more the numbers get bigger. In other words, the more sales you have, but you have associated loss, the greater your loss is. So it's balancing both of those. Do we have another question there?
Yes, we do. As we prepare for the tracking requirements of SB 1383, how can we gain trust with local store directors or managers so they are willing to work with us and report the pounds being donated?
Anybody want to take that on?
I mean, the data is as useful as us as operators as it is for whoever needs the reporting. I mean, we want to know what's going out. We want to know what we paid for what's going out. So we're going to record that for ourselves. And I don't think there's any negative aspect as a business operator for sharing that data as well.
Mike, that question was for me. And Andrew, the reason I ask is in Santa Barbara County, SBC Food Rescue, the organization that I work with, was hired to do a needs and capacity assessment with Waste Not OC, or Abound Food Care now. And as we contacted the local grocery stores, we kept getting pushback from managers saying that we don't need to talk to you. And even in context with the local jurisdictions who have to gather this information to report to Cal Recycle, their pushback is corporate hasn't told us to report to you, so we are not going to, we don't have to. So I don't know if it's better to collect the data from a higher level rather than the stores directly, and who would be the appropriate person to be contacting, I guess would be a better question. Secondly, is we have to sort out with Cal Recycle, because my understanding is that the local stores need to have the written agreements on file at the local store. So that's something else that we'll have to clarify and address. Thank you.
Pass that over to John.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say is reach out to the corporate resources, because, you know, if you can't reach out to the food safety manager or the corporate affairs manager, then, you know, you may need to go even higher than that. Like in my case, it would go above me to the Kroger division, where we've got a whole team that's focused on waste and sustainability and you know, those factors as well. So, you know, the store leaders, they are focused on what corporate is telling them to do, not what outside resources are asking of them. And going back to the point about, you know, getting those pounds and getting those numbers, like I mentioned at the beginning of this call, we trumpet those numbers whenever we can. 10 million last year alone. I mean, that's a great story to tell. And if they're not sharing that information or they're not collecting that information, they're missing out on a great story to tell.
Perfect. Thank you. I might be reaching out to you for the appropriate contact.
Please do.
John, that's a perfect perspective. I appreciate that.
We also had a question from Lisa. And I can ask it for her. She sent it to me. There are many attendees on the call that will be interacting with food industry businesses in an effort to engage them in donation programs. Do you have any tips for approaching these conversations? Are there words or messages we should avoid or lingo that would be helpful?
Well, you know, if you don't mind, I want to ask Kelsey to touch on that, because that was part of her study. So Kelsey, and I think it's absolutely accurate. So please go right ahead.
Sorry, I was a bit distracted because I guess the link isn't working. I'll try to sort that out. Yeah, so I think, and I'd be interested to hear Steve's perspective too, but a lot of the growers that we interviewed felt frustrated at dealing with people that they viewed as being really well-intentioned about the promises of food recovery, but rather naive about the realities of farming. And they also disliked when the issue was framed in ways that shamed them. So we actually ran into this as a research team. We had trouble recruiting growers to our study at first because we were asking them to participate in a study on food waste. And it turns out that a lot of growers in our study were offended by the term food waste. They felt like they were, you know, being blamed for something that wasn't really their fault. It really came down to market fluctuations or quality specs. You know, if they could sell it, they would. So we learned to quickly pivot and talk about it in terms of surplus food or food that doesn't make it to market. And the recovery organizations that we interviewed who had the most successful recovery programs had also learned how to talk about the issue in ways that, you know, demonstrated respect for growers, demonstrated an understanding of the constraints, the operational constraints. So yeah, not coming in feeling like you're going to save the day and feed the world and that growers don't know what they're doing, you know.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on that to say outreach is sales, and you need to know who your audience is. If you're going to go into a restaurant and conduct outreach and you go in the middle of lunch, or you go and there's a Roto-Rooter truck at the back door, that's a bad time. You're not going to get very far with that. You know, a lot of times it helps to be able to know who your target is and be able to speak their language. That's the whole idea of bringing this group together, is that you understand some of the concerns, some of the, just basically get an understanding of what they go through, so we can better provide that outreach and connect with them directly. Okay, do we have any other questions? All right, I got to tell you again, thank you to everybody for participating. This is a magical group. You're all leaders in this way. You're champions in what we're trying to accomplish, not only throughout the state, but around the country. You're really on the fore. I think everybody will be available, I'm sure. But thank you very much for participating. Thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch this and who will be watching it on YouTube. We appreciate your efforts. This is a bigger, broader effort, and it's going to take everybody. But thank you to each one of the panelists. Tremendous job. So with that, thank you so much. Meredith, if we don't have anything else, we can probably sign off then.
Yes, we had a request to share a list of speakers, emails, and business names, and we can send that out following the webinar.
And personal addresses also, is that what I heard? All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.